Hey there, how's it going? To no one's surprise, I'm sure, I just took part in another game jam. My community likes to say that I have a problem. But this is only my second game jam of 2021, so I really don't know what all the kerfuffle's about. I've been really excited about this jam for two reasons. First, it's been a while since I've taken part in a large-scale jam put on by a YouTuber, and the Wowie Jam 3.0 put on by Jonas Tyroller certainly fits that description. If you don't know about Jonas's channel, you are seriously missing out. The second reason I'm hyped for this jam is because this is the first time I'm doing an online game jam not alone. Yep, me. The person who usually does everything solo because I'm a glutton for punishment, is finally joining forces with a few others to create Jamtron. Over the last year, I've become pretty good friends with another game dev and pixel art streamer named Whitevault. You may have heard that name before because a while back I made a game called Flyer Kid for a jam that he hosted. And I said in that video that I felt I had to step up my art game because of how good Whitevault is at pixel art. We both have a very cartoony inspired pixel art style, and we've floated the idea of working together on a game jam for a while, but the timing just never lined up. Luckily, the Wowie Jam is hitting at a time when both he and I have an availability, so I'll be doing the programming and Whitevault will be doing the art. And we figured, since we're in for a penny, we might as well be in for a pound and see if we can find someone to do sound as well. If you frequent my live streams, you know the work of Drewpy. I absolutely love his music and listen to it all the time. I reached out to see if he'd be interested in joining our little team and got a pretty enthusiastic yes. I'm super excited because I admire both of their abilities so much. Now I just need to make sure that I don't fail at my part. The jam began on February 26th and ran for 72 hours. Unfortunately, right off the bat, we lost at least half a day because both Whitevault and I stream on Fridays. For me, every Friday, I playtest community games and give feedback and advice, which has a good amount of people waiting in the queue at any given time. So I feel bad not doing that Friday stream because I don't want to disappoint all those people that are looking for help and have been waiting for a while. The jam began at 6 AM my time, stupid time zones. But around 6 PM, all three of us jumped on a call together and got to planning. The theme we need to implement is failure is progress. I had been floating and kicking around ideas all throughout the day, but in the end, we settled on a platformer where the player becomes the platformer itself when they die, essentially creating progress from what is usually considered a failure in games. Now, I was hesitant to use this mechanic because I was sure that so many other people were going to use the same concept in their games. I was right. But we all liked the idea, and since we've never worked together before, it made sense to go for a more straightforward design. Also, because we used a very common concept, that doesn't mean that we can't put our own spin on it. After some brainstorming, we came up with an idea. What if the way the player died changed the way that they interacted and made progress? We came up with about 5 different death mechanics and decided on a screen resolution, and also picked that we should probably stick with one-screen puzzles because they're easier to design for a game jam, at least in my experience. The game will be about Randy the Reaper, who needs to collect souls to usher them to the afterlife by collecting them throughout the different levels. And since Randy is the Reaper and already dead, jumping on things like spikes is only a temporary setback. And I picked the right team because before the end of the call, Whitevault had already pretty much figured out what Randy was going to look like, and Drewpy had already made at least 7 or 8 different sound effect variations for jumping. After that, I got to work on getting the core mechanics in and working. This was all pretty straightforward for me. I've made plenty of platformers, so getting a player up and running was fairly simple. The yellow area is where the spikes will be, and when the player lands on them, it spawns a solid block and quickly respawns the player back at its starting location. In a game like this, where the player will have to die and traverse the same area several times, it's important to make sure that the respawn is fast and not make the player have to repeat the same action too many times. I wouldn't want to have to traverse a long level this way, so I think we made the right call to stick with one-screen puzzles. I set up a system for the souls you need to collect, which are basically keys. The door at the end of the level will not unlock and open unless you've collected all of them. Before going to bed, I was able to add the bubble death mechanic, which I really enjoy. An enemy, represented by the blue square, constantly shoots out a projectile. If the player comes into contact with said projectile, instead of becoming a platform like they did when they hit the spikes, they become a bubble and slowly float towards the ceiling. Once the player respawns, they can then jump on that bubble to get a bigger bounce out of it. This turned out to be a lot of fun, and the real-time aspect of dying, respawning, and getting back to your bubble to use it for the bounce added a lot to both the puzzle and the platformer part of the puzzle platformer, in my opinion at least. But at this point, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. I made a progress post for Twitter, and I headed to bed. The next day, the 3 of us all plugged away with our respective tasks. Whitevault and I both did a Saturday stream, which is not common for either of us. He made all the animations and death states for the character, tile map, the bubble enemy, and another enemy that shoots fire. Seriously, he's way too good and fast at this stuff. Drewpy sent me some work in progress music, which was so good in barely a day, it was ridiculous. Let's see what we got, guys. Ooh. Ooh, I dig it. and I spent the beginning of my stream adding the fire death mechanic. Like the bubble mechanic, there will be an enemy that shoots fireballs. If the player touches them, they die and their body falls to the ground on fire. The fire will then spread to any burnable block within range. While I was dealing with the fire spread being a bit finicky, Whitefall dropped a ton of art on me, so I decided to stop for a little bit and focus on adding a bunch of that in so we could build out a small vertical slice of what the level could hopefully look like and get a good feel for the game. So by the end of Saturday night, I had all the mechanics pretty much tightened up, and I added in the rest of the art that Whitefall had been sending me. So I've done a lot of game jams, and at this point, I've done a fair amount of puzzle games for them as well. And the one thing that I've learned over all of that time is that puzzle design is harder and takes longer than you think it will. So I wanted to make sure that on the last day, I was able to spend as much time as I could making levels, adding polish. I also had an idea for an extra feature that would track your death that I was kind of holding off to see if I would have time to implement. So even though we had originally planned for a couple more death mechanics, I let the team know that we were going to be sticking with just the 3 we had and focusing on those. I'd rather spend the time exploring these mechanics and using them well over adding a few more, which causes everything to get less attention and the level design to kind of be bad. Satisfied with the state of the game so far, I headed to bed ready for a busy final day. I know I've mostly talked about art coming in, but I began Sunday by adding in all of the sound effects Drewpy had been sending throughout the last couple days. I wanted to make sure all the mechanics were up and running before I started adding the sounds because I didn't know what I was going to have to change. But now that it's time to add the sounds, they're so good and there are so many of them. Drewpy seriously killed it, and this is now the game with the most audio files I have ever made. Audio really is a vitally important part of making games feel cohesive, but it does take a while to implement, so after a couple of hours of adding and testing all of the sounds and music, it was time for level design. When it comes to game jams, I 100% believe that less is more. A short, polished experience is way more desirable than a long one that's rough around the edges. I also don't want to put a lot of tutorial text around. I always think of it as the portal method, but teaching a mechanic in a way where it's very clear of what you're supposed to do and then reinforce it with the next level. Alright, we're about to hit the point where I'm going to spoil pretty much everything in the game, so if you would like to play it without knowing any of the info, please pause the video now, click the link in the description, and go give it a try. You back? You good? Alright, let's go. For level 1, I'm introducing the death on spike mechanic. You definitely cannot make it over this gap in one jump, and the soul, or ghost as we're calling them now, is right in the middle where you want to place the platform. So even if you really don't know what's going to happen, it's pretty clear that you need to jump to that ghost. And from there I hope it's pretty obvious. Level 2 is a reinforcement of the jump on spikes to make platform, this time with 2 ghosts to make sure that the player truly understands this is what they're supposed to be doing. Level 3 introduces the bubble enemy and the new death type. By this point, the player should clearly understand how to get the ghosts from what they did in the previous levels. But with what they know, there's no way for them to get up to the top platform where the door is. The position of the bubble shooter is set up so that the player can easily hit the bubble by accident while trying to collect the ghosts, which will then show them that they turn into a bubble. Even if the player does avoid it, there's still no way to make it to the door, and the bubble is right below the area where they would need to jump. I'm using a little bit of a video game trope here that bubbles usually bounce you, so I leaned a little bit on the expectation that this would be something the players would try to jump on. Once they do, they find out that they only bounce off the bubble once they've touched it and become one themselves. Level 4 then reinforces the bubble, making sure that the player learns that they can activate 2 bubbles at the same time and use them to have a double bounce to cross a larger gap. Level 5 is definitely my least favorite level, but the goal here is to let the player explore the 2 different mechanics and figure out their own way to gather up the ghosts and get out. Level 6 introduces the fire mechanic in what I think is a fairly straightforward way. By this time, the player knows that they need to die to make progress. So you see wooden boxes below a fireball, and what do you think you should do? I end up teaching 2 things here. First, I teach that the boxes will light each other on fire. If you jump up on the boxes at the end and get hit, they then have to burn down in a chain before you can leave. The second thing I'm teaching, which you could have learned in level 4 but wasn't super overt, is that your corpse can still collect a ghost. Level 7 uses the fire as a timer and adds some pressure to your movement as well, by flipping the script a bit because this time you don't want to get hit by the fire. If you get hit by the fire too many times, you're going to be delayed and you won't be able to make it across the bridge at the bottom. The level is still perfectly completable even if you don't move fast enough, it just takes a couple more deaths. And finally, level 8, where both bubble and fire are needed. This level doesn't actually require dying on the spikes at all, which I feel the player has done enough at this point. Here, they need to figure out how to get themselves up on top of these wooden crates to set themselves on fire. There are several ways to accomplish this, and it's fun to play with different methods to see which one you like the best to get up. I decided to stop here because I felt that I had a fun exploration of each of the mechanics without having any of them overstay their welcome. And as someone who plays a lot of game jam games, often live on stream, like I said before, I always appreciate a short, succinct game. You gotta think about your players. In a game jam, no one wants to sit down and play a game for too long because they want to be able to play more than one game from the jam in that sitting. So my aim is to give them a good, tight, solid experience and let them go on their way. But I did want to add something extra for those that wanted to spend a little more time, which I'll talk about in just a sec. Before getting to that though, at this stage, Drewpy, Whitevault, and I all hopped on a call to see where we were and what we had left to do. There were still a couple pickup sound and art assets that I had found we needed while putting together the levels. And using the really handy preview feature built into Construct 3, I was able to send them a link to have them play it to try it out. I was also able to watch their feed while they did it. They were both able to make it through the game and seemed to really enjoy it, which helped boost my confidence a lot that the levels weren't too hard. We could have called it here, but it was only around 9 PM, and we still had some time left. So I dug in and built out a system that tracks and stores the number of deaths you've had per level and makes changes to the level select screen. Oh, and during this time I also added the main menu, credits, and level select screen. But nothing really interesting happened, so it's not really worth talking much about. This is new for me, but I made all of the levels unlocked, which is something I've been liking more and more in Game Jam games. That way if someone does get stuck on any one particular level, they're not gated from the rest of the content and they can at least see the rest of the game. To encourage playing each level, I set a minimum number of deaths to complete. If you finish the level above that number, a ghost appears on the level select screen. Completing the level in the minimum or fewer deaths will get you a golden ghost instead. Getting the golden ghost in most levels is pretty straightforward, if not a bit challenging, but on level 5 I found a little exploit and I thought it was a bit cheeky to just leave it in. You can walk past these enemies when they're not shooting and get both of these ghosts with one death. I know it's not the fairest thing, but I figured if someone figured it out, it would make them feel really cool. And also it was late, so I didn't really think too hard with it and I just went with it. So if you did get stuck on this part and felt that it was cheap, I'm mostly sorry. Then all that was left was to export the build, make the screenshot GIFs, make the cover art, fill out the info for the game, and then post everything up. I ended up submitting the game with 2 hours left in the jam. Not too bad, except for the fact that this was 4 in the morning for me. After submitting, I was pretty happy. I went to bed feeling good and hoping that people would like it. Also hoping there was no bugs that I missed that would break everything. And when I woke up, I could not have been happier to see such amazingly positive feedback. And for the last week, it's just kept coming. Yeah, there were some issues and some things that people didn't like, but that's something to expect with everything you make. Also, by the time I woke up, someone had already posted a video walkthrough of how to get all the golden ghosts, including the secret on level 5. We'll have to see how we do in the end, but for right now, I'm sure that I can speak for myself, Whitevault, and Drewpy to say thank you all so much for such amazing and kind feedback. We're glad you all enjoyed the game, and thank you for playing. So I think this collaboration went great, and both Whitevault and Drewpy said they had a really good time. From my perspective though, I could have done things a little bit better. I spent a lot of time during the level design process also adding in all of the tile map art, which I think could have been time better spent if I had sent that to Whitevault to handle that part. He's better at that stuff anyway, while I spent time on the systems and getting the golden ghosts all set up. Maybe I wouldn't have had to have such a late night, but I probably would have found something else to work on, so I probably would have still been up that late. And even though I was up late trying to get everything done, I never felt that I was stressed out during the whole weekend, and both Drewpy and Whitevault said the same thing. I think we scoped this game appropriately, and we all worked great together. I still like solo deving, and I'm probably still going to be doing that most of the time, but it was a real honor to work with two people whose work I just absolutely adore. And I want to say, Drewpy and Whitevault, both of you guys, thank you so much for working with me on this. I had an absolute blast, and it was a pleasure. To anyone watching, if you haven't yet, please check both of them out. Their links are in the description. They're awesome people, and their work is amazing. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters, especially Abby Sean, Daniel Martin, David Scott, Huntrump, Nightfall, Kevin Halgau, Kormai, Liam Sorta, MLK, Motzi Makes, Nazar Salim, Salty Pretzel, Scott Hansen, Soapy Gnome, and Straight Up Gruntle. As always, you are all awesome people, and I cannot thank you enough for your support. If you want to be part of the game making process, come say hi over at twitch.tv/Vimlark, or you can message me on Twitter or join the Discord with a lot of other amazing people. I really hope you're all healthy and safe wherever you are, and I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.